Welcome, I'm Anna Galetli, and we are going to continue on with Unit 5 on the axial skeleton. All right, so quickly, your vertebral column, we're going to divide it up into a couple different sections. You've got your cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, and coccyx. So if we're looking at those, we are going to focus on 7 cervical vertebra, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacrum, and then an average of 4, but 3 to 5 of the coccygeal elements. Now, the way I remember this is at 7 a.m. I eat breakfast. At 12 noon, I eat lunch. And at 5 p.m., it's dinner. Okay? And then you'll have to think of something for sacrum and coccyx. So with the cervical, what you want to think about is that this is where your neck is. The thoracic is the upper back. And then remember, off of every single one of these, there's a rib. So your thoracic is where your rib cage is. Lumbar is your lower back. And then the sacrum is basically your butt. Okay, so between the two buttocks or butt cheeks. And then your coccyx is your tail. We do have a tail. It's small, but we do have one, and it is important. You can't get rid of it. One other thing I should emphasize is the fact that with the sacrum and the coccyx, the vertebral elements are fused. When these things form, there is a growth plate between them. So they literally form. If you look at a fetus or an embryo, you're going to see separate bones, okay? And then they fuse together into a single bone with growth. All right, so I've already said that you've got 7 cervical vertebrae, okay? We can abbreviate that, C1, C2, etc. All right, same basic form. This slide is just collecting the information you need that's unique to each cervica. So, cervical vertebra, you've got a transverse foramen in each transverse process. The orientation of the articular processes, think of it kind of like sandwich bread right on top of each other. And then your C1 and C2 cervical vertebrae get special names, the atlas and the axis. Same thing, just summarizing some information on the thoracic and lumbar, all right? Special things about the thoracic vertebrae, you have costal facets. You need to know those. That's where your ribs attach to them. The articular processes are oriented differently, and this is important for how your body bends, okay? And then with the lumbar vertebrae, they don't get a whole lot of special things. They're kind of big and fat and squat, and they are oriented lateral medial. Generally speaking, as you go from top to bottom, the vertebrae get bigger as you get closer to your butt, okay? So we're going to use the lumbar vertebra as our general plan, okay? You need to know all of these features. You've got the body. This is going to be the front. This is the anterior, okay? Inside your vertebral foramen, you have your spinal cord, along with some other stuff that you'll get to towards the end of term. We have these things over here that kind of look like ears to me. Those are called the transverse process. So transverse meaning off to the side, across the plane, okay? And a process is a projection, okay? Then you've got the spinous process. So when you feel your back and you feel the spine, you're feeling the spinous process, okay? Now, this hole, the vertebral foramen, is created by these edges of bone here and here, okay? This section from here to here is called the vertebral arch, and it's made up of 2 things. In the back, you have the lamina, and in the front, you have the pedicle. And then, of course, you've got the body right here, and so forth. Now, the lamina you want to remember, and the way I remember is I think of a laminectomy, and it helps that I know what a laminectomy is. Laminectomy is when they come in with a saw and they cut here and they cut here and they pop the spinous process off so that they can get to your spinal cord. Okay? Now I'm going to erase some of this stuff because it's bothering me. Okay, I want to point out this right now. That is called the superior articular process. So superior articular process. This smooth surface here, that gets a different name. That's a facet. So the superior articular facet. So this whole thing is the superior articular, I'm going to write it again, superior articular process. And the smooth surface here is the facet. The facet is where another bone attaches to it. The process is the projection that's being created by that. Okay? All right, next slide. Same basic thing, but now you're seeing a cadaver bone. Okay? You have the body here. This whole thing is the arch, and then right here is the lamina, and then this is the pedicle. Now, do you see how I'm writing on this? This is what you want to be doing. You want to pull this stuff out and you want to write on it. All right, so this thing right here is the transverse process, okay? This entire thing is the superior articular process. And this smooth surface right here is the superior articular facet. Okay? Big hole, vertebral foramen, and in there you have your spinal cord. Okay? Next slide. All right, so this slide is just giving you a better picture of those processes and facets. So again, it's hard to see from the top view. So up here, you have the superior view, okay? Down here, we've got a lateral view. From the lateral view, I can see the entire process, okay? And then right here is going to be the facet. And so this is where the bones line up one on top of each other. When you have movement between in your vertebrae, in your back, this is where the movement is occurring, is only here and only down here. Here, and then you can see a remnant of it up there. You don't want movement here at all. If you've got movement, there might be a slight, but if you have a lot of movement there, you're going to start pinching your spinal cord, and then it's going to hurt, and you're going to be really unhappy. And actually, let me add on shape distinguishing features. So I'm going to talk more about this in a minute when I look at the thoracic slide. But so over here, you've got your thoracic vertebra. And over here, you've got a lumbar. And this is probably a nice view to see the difference. So when you look at a side or a lateral view of the thoracic, it looks kind of like a giraffe. And if you look at the lumbar, it kind of looks like a moose. So looking over at the lumbar, you can see that this is kind of like the snout, and this is that stuff that hangs down, and then you've got the horns, and then the ears over here. Then with the giraffe, here's like the snout, all right? And then you've got the eyes and, or the ears, excuse me, and then you've got those little horns that stick up. Okay, now we're gonna move on. All right, so now we're looking at a drawing that shows you how these are stacked on top of each other. So right here is my superior articular process with a facet on it, okay? And then it's difficult to see, but basically right under there is going to be the inferior one. Now notice that I've got a superior, all right, and an inferior lining up against each other. So same thing over on that side. I have an inferior, a superior and an inferior. Oh, let me just erase that. I have a superior and an inferior lining up against each other. Then you can see on the bodies, I have an intervertebral disc. Okay, so that's written right there. Notice it's spelled with a C, not a K. And that is the cushion between the two bones, and that's where they're stacked up on top of each other. All right, next slide. All right, so now we're looking at the thoracic vertebra, and what I want you to focus on are the unique features, okay? So right here, I've got my transverse process, and you can see it right in here, okay? Now, let me change colors. This right here is going to be where my superior articular facet is on the superior articular process. Now, on the transverse process here, and here, and then here, and here, I have what are called costal facets. And you can be more specific and you can call it the transverse costal facet and the superior costal facet. But frankly, I'm just going to be ecstatic. If you will remember, it is the costal facet. And what happens is the head of my rib is there, and then the neck of the rib, so that's where the neck of the rib is, and it comes around like this, and it wraps around the body. Okay, so this is where the ribs articulate. They're not really supposed to move, okay? We'll talk more about joints later. So they are adhered tightly right here and here. So you don't want your ribs moving. Now where the red is, those are my articular facets between the two vertebrae, and that is where you accumulate movement. Okay. Now, you may be able to see this, you may not be able to, but if you look at it kind of in a side view, and if you rotate it a little bit more around, you would see that the thoracic vertebrae kind of looks like a giraffe. So that, you know, this is the nose, and here are the eyes, and here are the horns. That helps people with identification if they try to focus on seeing a giraffe shape. All right, so the atlas. What you want to focus on is that there is no body, and we don't really have a spinous process either, okay? So you want to focus on that. We do still have transverse processes though, okay? And in each of those, we have a transverse foramen. Now what I do is I think of the foramen as the holes for earrings. So whenever I'm trying to identify a cervical vertebra, I look for the earring holes, okay? So these are kind of like little ears, and this is where the rings go. Now, this is where your spinal cord is going to be. So I'll use red. This is where the articulations for the occipital condyles are. So if you remember on your occipital bone, we have occipital condyles. And this is the attachment point between your head bone and your neck bone right there. So you want to focus on that feature as well. All right, looking at your axis, weird things. Okay, so first of all, the not weird things. You've got the transverse process, and you have the transverse foramen. So you have the ear with the earrings, okay? Now you do have a proper spinous process, okay? Now the body has been altered. So you can see a remnant of the body down here, but then you have this thing right here, and that is called the dens or odontoid process. So dens or odontoid, because it looks like a tooth. So that word means tooth or dentition. Okay? So that's really weird. And that, basically, it's kind of like the body of the atlas broke off and attached to the axis to create a tooth. So that the axis rotates on the atlas at this point. Okay, so that you get a little bit more rotation with the neck. And here we're looking at that rotation. So you can see here is the dens, okay? And you can see it kind of looks like the body came off of the atlas and attached down here. So that right here you can do a little bit of rotation, and then you got more rotation off around the sides right here. And then one of the things I did over here is I kind of put down how much rotation you have between the different joints in terms of whether you can flex or extend, do lateral movement, so side to side, like ear to shoulder, and then rotation, okay? And you can see there's only about 3 degrees of rotation between your occipital atlantal joint, so that's here, between your occipital and your atlas, okay? But you've got quite a bit of rotation, 45 degrees, between this and this, okay? All right, next slide. All right, so here is your info slide on intervertebral discs and the different parts that you are going to know. So let's look at the picture. All right, looking at the picture, you've got your spine, you've got your body right here, okay? Spinous process, sorry, you've got your spinous process, not your spinal cord. And then you can see right here is where your spinal cord is located. Now coming off the spinal cord, and we'll do this more the last few weeks of term, you can see the spinal nerves, okay? They're coming out. Now, the intervertebral disc is designed to be a pad between the vertebrae to absorb shock, okay? To do that, you have a massive amount of fibrocartilage that's going to be made into a ring. And I kind of think of a cake, all right? And in that cake, I want to put cherry filling. Now, if I put another layer of cake on it, the cherry filling's all going to squish out the sides. So I take icing and I make a ring of icing, all right, that's really, really dense. And now when I squash another layer of cake on top of it, my cherries don't squish out. That's kind of what your fibrocartilage is doing here, okay? Is it's forming a ring to prevent this pulpy stuff that is really better for compression from squishing out. Now, sometimes that doesn't work, and basically you get little tears or ruptures in the fibrocartilage, and this pulp does squish out. And when you have pain from a herniated disc, what's happening is it's compressing usually some part of the spinal nerve, which is really unpleasant. All right, the sacrum and the coccyx. You're not learning most of the terms that are on here. Please refer to your terms list in terms of what you memorize, so you don't memorize stuff you don't need to. So what you want to remember is that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sacral elements that fuse, and you can see where the epiphyseal plate and then epiphyseal line used to be, okay? This is where you attach to L5. So L5, fifth lumbar, that's a funny L. The fifth lumbar vertebra that's even worse, is located right here. All right, so this is your fifth lumbar vertebra. And then you've got its superior articular process, which is going to basically line up with L5's inferior articular process, okay? And the sacral crest is the extension of the spinous process. So that's basically what you're looking at. The sacral canal lines up with the vertebral foramen, which is where your spinal cord goes, okay? So the nerves that are going to be coming off of the spinal cord are going to go down through that vertebral foramen. Some of them will come out through the sacral hiatus. Some of them are going to come out through these various foramina, okay? Your coccyx right here, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. Sometimes there's a fifth element, and sometimes there's only 3 elements. The coccyx is sometimes referred to as a vestigial organ. I strongly disagree. It is not vestigial, and it's not vestigial because you have a lot of things that attach to it that are extremely important, like muscles of your pelvic floor, which if your coccyx is damaged, you have problems with defecation and intercourse and urination. Also, your spinal cord anchors to the coccyx with the filum terminale, and that basically keeps it from springing up and down like a church bell rope. And we'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks. But your coccyx, it's important, so don't blow it off. Next slide. All right, this part's fast. You've got your ribs and your sternum. You want to know everything on this slide. All right, next picture. All right, so you've got your sternum. So this is, if you tap your breastbone, you have your sternum. And you've got the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid. When you're young, the xiphoid is made out of hyaline cartilage. With advanced age, so probably not till your 40s or 50s, maybe 60s or 70s, it will actually solidify and turn into bone. But for most of us at this point in time, it's probably still cartilage. Okay, that's it for the sternum. Then you've got your ribs. You're going to divide your ribs up into the true ribs, the false ribs, and the floating ribs. True ribs have their own strand of costal cartilage that will attach directly to the sternum, okay? The floating ribs, 8, 9, and 10, all right, the false ribs, 8, 9, and 10, they have costal cartilage, but they all come together, meet up, merge with the costal cartilage of number 7 to attach to the sternum, okay? So don't forget that all of that stuff is called costal cartilage, which if I'd been paying attention, I would have seen was already written right there. The floating ribs, no cartilage. Well, they do. They've got a little bit on the tips right here, but it doesn't attach. No cartilage. I'll clarify. No. Oh, that's awful. No cartilage attaches to sternum. Okay? These should not be removed because you want a tinier waist. There are two very, very important things that are being protected by those floater ribs, and they are your kidneys. Okay? Next slide. And that is it for Unit 5, and we will stop there and you can go on to your next assignment.